resuming a parish newsletter. If your committee supports that notion, let me know, because there are people who are willing to head that up.
Bill, I think that newsletter, one aspect under the parish life is newsletter. You might want to take a look at that before you guys start jumping on it. So otherwise, we're going to have a lot of different people jumping on different things.
You will certainly be part of it.
Yeah, and I think that falls under parish life. That news from the pews that we used to have.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Although this one, I think at least the first inclinations would be to mail it to every household.
Okay. Thank you, Bill. Thank you. Yeah.
And
Gary.
change of subject.
Yeah.
I frequently get asked how many families, or sometimes they'll say how many members are in your parish.
That's a great segue for the next topic.
It sure
What
is.
would we say here?
What would we say?
What would we say? We get that ruling once a year, I think.
Yeah, the
Great
annual
segue.
report,
Next topic.
and that's a great segue into Rick's, what Rick's gonna have.
Thanks, Gary. That was not planned, by the way.
It happens a lot.
Slide. Okay, so we kind of had just a really good example here of why we want to do strategic planning. Okay, I like to use the analogy of our parish is as big as the Story City. Right. So imagine trying to get everybody in the Story City organized and marching in the same direction. Okay? And we've got different neighborhoods in Story City, and we've got different fraternal organizations, okay? And we all want to make Story City better, all right? But unless we really get together and get organized, we're going to be heading off in different directions. And we just saw a great example of a newsletter, okay? It could easily happen that two different groups could start working on newsletters, and then they get frustrated with each other. So that's why we did strategic planning, okay? We got a cross-section of the leadership of the parish together, and we agreed on what our vision for the future is. We started with what our current assessment of our strengths or weaknesses, opportunities, and threats were. We came up with a single statement of where we want to go, and then we came up with, I think it's 9 different strategies or high-level ideas of where are we going to put our focus, and then about 12.5 major projects. Okay. The one part of our plan that's been kind of lacking yet is how are we going to measure how we're doing? Okay? And obviously we have to have different levels of measures. We have to have some the top-level measurements of the parish, and then I suspect, or I want to encourage, each of the committees are going to develop some of your own measures. How are we doing as a faith formation group? How are we doing as a stewardship committee? All right? And we've struggled a little bit with this, and I think part of it is because as a parish we're probably not used to measuring ourselves. All right? And so after several months of working through this with many of you, I've made an executive decision. Okay? And so at least for the first year, here are the first 5 metrics that I'm going to propose we use. Right? And the first is, what's the number of people that we have registered? Okay? The fact that Gary doesn't know what that is tells me we've got to do a better job of measuring that and sharing it. All right? Now you could argue that doesn't tell us everything. Obviously it doesn't. Okay? There's no one perfect measure. Okay? We're going to start here. Okay, almost consider this to be almost equivalent to sales of a company. Right? You've got profitable sales and you have not profitable sales. Okay, but I don't think there's a company around that doesn't measure sales. Okay, we're going to measure parish registration, parishioner registration. I also recommend we're going to measure sacramental participation. Okay, so this is a quality of that participation. This might be kind of like profitability. Probably got to get to the next life to figure out exactly how profitable we all were, but this would be pretty good for here, okay? Right? Third one, financial contributions, right? That is the engine for all the other good things that we can do. Yep, again, Does it measure it perfectly? Maybe it should be average dollars. I'm guessing the finance committee is going to be eventually breaking this down, slicing it all different ways. Okay, how many people give? What's the median gift? Okay, at the top level, we're going to measure total contribution. The fourth is going to be parishioner involvement. This is where I scratch my head a little bit. I'm going to be asking you for help in a couple minutes. All right, we've got to have something that is easy to measure. Right? If it's going to be difficult, we're not going to do it. So one of the things I'm going to ask you to do is, when we break into groups here, is how would you measure that? Okay. One of the things the Knights of Columbus does at the end of the year is they ask every member to estimate how much time they spent. Okay. What's the government do with its consumer price index? They take a bucket of goods and they say, what's that cost? So we might let's take a bucket of activities and measure how many people are participating. Okay. And then the final is, I think we need to develop some kind of a parishioner survey that they're giving us feedback that says, how are we doing? So that's what I'm proposing for the top level. Is there another one there, Terry? Sorry. Okay. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to break into tables by committee. If you're not an official member of a committee, just join a table that is of interest to you. And I want you to talk about 4 things. We're going to take, can we take 20 minutes? 15 minutes? Okay. And I'll announce when you need to be moving on. The first question I want you to ask is, how can we objectively and easily measure parish involvement? Each team come up with one idea there. Okay. So you have to have a secretary at each table, put down on a sheet of paper what committee it is, and then number 1, how would you measure parish involvement? Second is, what 2 questions would your committee put on a parish survey? Third, what 3 or 4 metrics do you think your committee has to be measuring to understanding how effective you are? And then 4, if your committee has some initiatives up here, how will you objectively measure that? It just may be a project schedule, okay? But maybe you can come up with a measure, okay? So 4 questions, sheet of paper, label who you belong to, 1, 2, 3, 4, and I'd like to pick those up when we're done here. Okay, if anybody needs a sheet of paper, I've got something up here. Okay, so parish life is over here, stewardship committee, just kind of fall in. I'll announce when you ought to be moving on to the next question. Cindy, how much time? There you go. Right here. We got one right there. 15 minutes. Okay. So we got 15 minutes, so you're only going to have about 4 minutes per question.